And joining me now is Dr. Ian Moore, Section Chief Officer for the Infectious Disease at the National Institute of Health. He currently sits on their COVID Community Advisory Committee. Welcome, Dr. Moore.
Thank you for having me.
Can you first start by telling us about your role at the National Institute of Health?
Sure. So I lead a pathology laboratory that was a part of the team that created the vaccine that was a partnership between NIH and Moderna. In my capacity, my background is actually influenza research, so respiratory viruses are in my background, as well as vaccine development. But in addition to that, I'm a veterinary pathologist, so I study infectious disease. I am the person who looks at it under the microscope and tries to assess what the outcome of a certain process is. So in this case, for the Moderna vaccine, sorry.
No, please continue.
Oh yeah, sorry. So so for the Moderna vaccine, what I actually did was the preclinical studies. So preclinical studies are the ones that actually are done in animal models to determine whether it's safe and effective before it ever makes it to the human clinical trials, and that's the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And then after phase 3, you have the FDA approval process.
Well, you certainly know how it works, but you also know that the Black community has concerns, some people in the Black community. And I know that you have advocated to have a bridge between science and the healthcare industry and also the Black community. What can you tell us about that?
So in the last, I would say in the last few months, I kind of just felt compelled because a lot of people don't know that people that, you know, from the minority communities, from Black communities, people don't know that we're a part of this process. And so I want them to know that, you know, from one of the lead scientists in particular for the development of the Moderna vaccine, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, she and I and others are in this process. We're in the chain. I've heard a lot of people reference Tuskegee, the Tuskegee experiment, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Well, I'm an alum of Tuskegee, and I'm very aware of that process. I'm very aware of the origins of hesitancy in the Black community. But I'm also here to tell people that this is not the Tuskegee experiment. We have Black scientists, we have Black researchers here trying to get this vaccine, well, in this case now, having got this vaccine to the FDA, and now it's safe and it is effective. I've taken it myself. And so I want people to know they can trust this vaccine, especially in the face of a pandemic like we have right now.
Well, we're really glad to hear that, Dr. Moore, but what can you tell us about the long-term effects? And that might be where a lot of people have concerns. People are saying, well, I took the vaccine, I feel fine. But then there's this group of people who are saying, yeah, but what about in a year if I'm feeling sick, or 2 years, or 5 years? We know that these trials usually take years and years and years so you can study the participants and see how their body reacts. How do you explain that level of comfort to people? You seem to have it.
Yeah, no, and the reason is because I guess I've recently put together a YouTube video where I describe the way that mRNA vaccines work, and I think this is probably one of the most important parts here. I have tried many times and have explained this vaccine process to many people, and I would say probably 80% of the people I talked to initially, they were completely reluctant. I'm not going to take it. After I had a time to explain, because I think a lot of the reluctance is not knowing what exactly the vaccine is, what it does, how it works, and then what like you said, the long-term effects are. But what I will tell you about mRNA vaccines is that they're uniquely safe, and the reason is because the mRNA itself, once it does its job, if you imagine mRNA is like a recipe. For a recipe to make something that is on the virus, but the virus is not in the vaccine itself. You take a recipe, you put it in the oven, after you cook it for a while, on the other side comes out a cake. In this cake, the cake is the spike protein. That's the protein that we're targeting. We educate the body on that spike protein. Your body makes antibodies. Your body can protect itself. After that cake is baked, that recipe disappears, and those proteins are degraded as well. So the reason that we're not concerned about the long-term safety of it, and in particular I'm not concerned about it, is because of the fact that it's probably one of the safest vaccine platforms you can use. And once things have been done and your body is educated, those recipes and those proteins disappear. They completely are degraded. So that's why there's no concern about the safety, the long-term safety effects.
That's interesting, Dr. Moore. I've never actually heard anybody explain it like that. So does that mean every year then we're going to have to get this COVID vaccine because, as you said, it disappears from your body after a certain amount of time?
So it's not necessarily the vaccine is the vaccine components that need to help you develop an antibody response disappear. But now how long antibody protection lasts, that's still ongoing. And unfortunately, we're not afforded the time that we would in a normal non-pandemic time where we could follow people out for a year and see how long and check titers and see how long they have antibodies. In this case, we have to, get vaccinated, protect ourselves, and go forward. But that's a very good point that you make. It's very possible that we could have a booster, a need for a booster that would give you that memory bump that you need from an antibody response. So in other words, if your antibodies start to go downhill, then you get a vaccine just like the flu shot. So there could be a situation where you go in and get a flu shot and you get a coronavirus booster, but it has not been determined just yet.
But what about all these new strains that we're hearing about? How does it work against the UK strain and the Brazilian strain and all the ones that may be popping up that we haven't even heard of yet? That's an excellent question. And what I will tell you is that most of the companies right now, Pfizer, Moderna, and others, are looking at how well their current vaccine protects against these variants. These variants so the irony is that the variants are actually popping up because of the fact that there's replication is allowed to happen. So more people get infected, that's more opportunity that the virus has to mutate, and then a new variant pops up. But what I will tell you is that if you don't get vaccinated, you are guaranteed to not have any protection. There's the thought process right now is that the vaccines that we do have will provide you some protection because they are so effective, 94 and 95% effective. They will give you some protection, especially against severe disease and hospitalization. But for someone who wants to wait and say, well, why even take it? That's not a good choice right now because it's very possible that if you have no protection, it's like going outside in a rainstorm and not expecting to get wet. And real quick, if you've already had COVID-19, should you still go ahead and get the shot?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And actually, some people they're determining right now whether or not you would need one shot or the full series. But definitely, because once again, this goes back to the original question you asked, you don't quite know how long your antibody protection lasts. And there is data that supports that a vaccine response, antibody response, has been, in some cases, seen to be higher than a person who had natural infection. So if you think about it, your infection could almost be considered your first shot. And then you go back after a certain amount of time, and then you go back and get your second shot, or really your first shot, which would be like a booster, because you should have some type of antibody response from the natural infection.
Well, Dr. Ian Moore, we are out of time, but I must tell you, you really have a way of explaining this in very simple terms, so I appreciate it. We really learned a lot from you today. Thanks for joining us here on BNC Now.
Thank you for having me.